disfrutar el conejo, me parece increíble. La cara está haciendo el conejo. Sí, claro. No, Sí, así como los de era lo que era. Sí, no he visto los de la maestría. Sí, entonces tenemos que hablar de cosas decentes. Okay. ¿Qué proyecto está? Lo que se cambia. Y haciendo un tratamiento para aplazar la información. Entonces está haciendo con la vamos a empezar. Y tenía como un relleno. Porque es
Hola, hola. Adelante, pasen adelante como en su casa, acomódense. Tranquilos, estamos apenas empezando.
¿Qué? Abra. Solo abra. Abre la puerta. Sí, donde están los...
Ok.
Ok, bueno.
¿Estás? Estamos. Bueno, bienvenidos a la primera charla conjunta entre la Escuela de Diseño Publicitario y la Escuela de Diseño de Interacción. Espero que esta sea la primera de muchas actividades conjuntas que realicemos. Muchas gracias por venir, qué bonito ver la 414 así llena. Yo soy Ana Don, para los que no me conocen, soy la directora de la Escuela de Diseño de Interacción. Y hoy nos acompaña Dan Boyarsky. Dan nos ha honrado con su presencia en la maestría de Diseño de Interacción. Tiene más de 35 años de experiencia práctica y docente. Es un apasionado del diseño. Él ha llegado desde el diseño gráfico, se ha ido acercando a la interacción, ha sido parte de los avances en el diseño, de los avances en la tecnología, tanto en Carnegie Mellon como en su práctica profesional, y así de profundo como es su conocimiento y su experiencia, también es su generosidad. Entonces, aprovechemos esta oportunidad para hablar de tipografía, para hablar del tiempo del movimiento, pero también aprovechen de hacerle todas las preguntas que se les ocurran. Entonces, para no atrasarlos más, los dejo con el maestro Dan Boyarsky.
Hola, buenas. I hope you don't mind that I will speak in English because my Spanish is terrible. I can say those few words, but other than that, it'll have to be English. There's one chair up here, and if you don't mind sitting on the floor, you'll have the best view of the house. Come. No, I should be just You okay? Yeah, I'm fine. Okay, great. There's room on the floor up here if you want. Are you staying here? Or are you going back? Yeah, no. Sorry for you giving up your chair. Okay, so I will start. Thank you very much for coming. This is a nice audience to have. I hope the subject interests you or interested you enough to bring you here, and I hope that you will find this an interesting presentation with interesting examples. Can you hear me in the back? It's okay? All right. If at any time, if you don't hear me, just make a sign and I'll try to speak louder. I call this moving messages because I was educated 45 or more years ago as a graphic designer. In the mid-1960s, I learned how to compose with type and images to be printed on paper. Small paper, big paper, posters, and I thought that that would be my career, designing communications which would be printed. In the mid-80s or early 80s, everything changed with the introduction of the personal computer. Tools and software began to emerge that allowed graphic designers to do their work, not physically but virtually, and send those files to the printer. As well, there were advances in software and the internet when that appeared that said, you communication designers, this is also an area for you to be doing work. So my attention moved, well, my attention never left paper. I'm still very interested in print, but it also included screens. And I included that in my teaching, and I found that when you can move words and letters on a screen, it begins to affect the way you read the communication differently in some cases from paper, and that's really what the subject is that I will talk about today. So, let me start out with a comparison. And I want a comparison between messages that appear on paper and messages that appear on the screen. So I will show you three examples. First, I will show you the type on the screen to show you what the words were, and then I will show you a video that was made by a student. By the way, all the work that you will see today are student work. My students over the last 15 or more years. Some are old examples because they are still wonderful examples, and some of them are newer examples. But I'll show you these three pieces, and then I want to engage in a very brief just exchange with you and ask what you thought of the two. words on paper, words on screen. So the first piece has statistical data or facts about what happens in one day in the United States. This is very old. This goes back to, I think, 1997 when it was made. So the facts are obviously old, but it doesn't matter because the principle is what's important here. So this is sort of what happens in the States. How many babies are born, or how many people drive to work, and so on. So this is a way that we can present, if we're doing a print piece, this is the way that we can present information on a piece of paper, on a newspaper, on a poster. We arrange it nicely like this. I will then show you, after I show you the other examples, the video of it. The second piece is very different. It's a comedy piece. I'll let you read it quickly. Okay, so even reading it is making you laugh a little bit. So, and this was a stand-up comic. This guy, Mitch Hedberg, I don't know who he is personally, but he's a comic. And he gets up in front of audiences and does comedy routines. And this is what he said. And so I'll show you a video that was made based on these words. And the third one, I'm actually not going to show you the words because it will kind of reveal the punchline, so to speak. And so I'll just simply let the piece run. So let me show you these three pieces. Let me just come out of here and this is the one on the statistical information. The second one about football. three very different messages, three very different ways of presenting them. And I would be interested in hearing any thoughts you might have, any impressions you might have on the comparison between seeing it on paper and seeing it in motion. Guys, you can come up. There's room up here. You can be in the hall. Come on, if you want, rather than being by the door. If you want, we can start with the first one. The facts about one day in the United States. Any thoughts about it? Anyone? Yes.
It sounded like a music piece. And the music was beautiful as well, but it was weirder. The baby is born, the
Yes.
person died.
Okay.
Sort of like a song, like a bridge or a,
Okay.
you know what I mean?
Okay.
Just come back to that.
The fact that that appeared
Yeah.
on a regular basis,
Yeah.
on rhythm, did
Yeah.
that affect the way you read it or the way you
Absolutely.
understood it? Okay. Okay. That's a good point. Any others on the first one? Yeah. Sorry.
I think in general, the three of them seemed like someone was telling them to me. Like they came alive more than
Okay.
reading them.
Uh-huh.
Because I can have a certain perception of something I read,
Yes.
but when I have motion and specific timing to the way they say it,
Yeah.
or even in the third one, the way they put the words
Yeah. Yeah.
and that they appear,
Mhm.
that somehow it comes alive, even if it's just a screen, right?
Yes. Okay, so you're saying that on all three pieces you felt that
Yeah.
there was a person behind those messages, even a
I can almost
voice.
hear them, like
Yes, okay.
repeating the words and the way they were saying it.
So you felt like you would almost hear them. And that's I love you saying that because that's a point I'll bring up later with a couple of examples, but that's great. Yeah.
Yeah, on the first one, the baby was born, was appearing every 10 seconds. Right? So you immediately read the statistic at first, and then you continue linking, all right, baby's born,
Mhm.
continue every 10 seconds, and the person dies every 14.
Yeah.
And you constantly have that perspective, and while you continue reading other
Right.
statistics. So it's just very good to go back and realize.
Okay, so that's a good point, and that's very similar to your point. And that's, I think, one of the key points about this first piece, is that in real time, as you're watching this video, a baby is born somewhere in the United States. And in real time, as you're watching this video, a person dies somewhere in the United States. This is something, once you realize that it actually is real time, you begin to interpret it or read it or hear it in a very different way. And one of the points is that you cannot do that on paper. You can try, you can put timestamps, you can have them turn the page so that they see a new message, but you don't feel it in the same way that both of you just explained it. So that's one of the most, for me, one of the most important findings in doing this kind of work. When you're presenting information, and time is actually a really critical issue, and you use it to show us that. Use the medium for what it can do, not replication of paper. And still too often I find on the web, not everything, but still there's a lot on the web that kind of looks like paper. It's lists of things. You click on a word, another piece of paper comes up, right? There are some websites that are doing some very nice things, but in general, it's still very much bound by the way we organize things on paper. Let's move to the second one. Any thoughts on the comedy routine? What do you think? Yeah.
It's probably more comical. I believe that, for example, when you read it, it's not the same as seeing it come to life, and you make like an image so clear in your mind that you can virtually just imagine it like if you were in the place of the word.
So are you saying that you liked the video?
I'd rather
Or you
have
would
the
rather
video
read it?
than the paper.
You would rather have the video?
Yes.
Okay, because it helps you begin to see, to imagine what's being said? Okay. Other opinions? Was the style in keeping with the comedy? Because the first one was very slow, quite serious. The music added to the seriousness. But this comedy routine was pretty much fun, having fun with the movements and all that stuff. Was that appropriate, do you feel? Okay, so a lot of you are saying yes, that worked out. And the music, Very different also from the first one. This was lively, very classical, Charles Mingus, but it was fun. In fact, the piece itself, they were having fun playing it because they were joking with each other. So again, it just adds to the lightness of it. So picking music is critical because music communicates also in the same way that motion communicates. The last one. What did you think of that? Yes.
I don't know if it was the purpose of the creator, but it made me feel desperate because I was very anxious to find out the whole phrase in every screen.
Yeah.
What I was thinking was that death has to be something quite desperate. I don't know if that was the purpose of the creator, but that drove that feeling in myself.
But he elicited a response from you, and it was an emotional response. So I would say that was a good.
Yeah, and every time a word was revealed, the whole meaning of the piece changed a little bit.
So were you bothered by the fact that he presented each sentence out of order?
It seems like the way he's trying to understand what he's going through.
Yeah.
Pretty much like by revealing, like he said, every word at a different timing.
Yeah.
It's like we are leaving also like this shuffling of our thoughts.
Yeah. So you're going through it
Yeah.
with
Not
him.
only that, I think it's really interesting how, because of the message and everyone's kind of thinking and how you're going to read it, everyone's going to have a different dialogue in their mind with the same message.
Right.
So it's really interesting.
Yeah. Was the pace too slow?
A bit, but I think it was the point.
nice.
It was purposeful.
It was,
Yeah.
he made it so slow because
Yes.
it was that grueling.
Yes. Yep. Exactly. A number of you have alluded to this, and I believe that this very much captures his anguish, his anxiety. This piece came out of the very first time we did any kind of motion work in a typography class, and this was in '94, so 20 years ago today. And I was preparing a project for my junior typography class, and it was going to be another print piece, and I stopped myself and I went, we're still doing only print. Not that print is bad, but these students' lives, your lives, are filled with motion. You're on the web, you watch TV, you go to movies, there's motion all around you. And I was still emphasizing the static-ness of print. And I had just gotten a beta version of a new piece of software which eventually became Macromedia Director, where you could move elements. And so I brought that to the class and I said, we're going to do this new project. And I just said, come up with a few sentences about what you did last summer. And, did you have a job? Did you have fun? Just write about whatever happened this summer and bring that into class. And this is what this guy wrote on a piece of paper. And he said, I hope this is okay, but this is something that's been troubling me, and I want to deal with it. And this was the result. I thought, wow, this is incredible. This is the first time we did it. Other examples were also good. There's one that I cannot show anymore because director files cannot be shown with current operating systems on the Mac. But it was about a guy who was stuck in an elevator, and it was fantastic. It was really great. So I thought there's something here, and ever since then I've incorporated time-based communication in my typography classes. Anyway, let's move on. One last thing about the last one, which obviously didn't have sound. I recall many years ago showing this, and someone in the audience, it was an older person, who said, he said, because of the content, I've never realized how loud silence can be. Said that already. I like this quote by Liszewski. This is from the early part of the 20th century. And he said, the new book demands new writers. And the more you think about it, he was not just talking about books and not just talking about writers, but he said anything new needs new thinking. New government needs new people, new politicians with new thinking. New education needs new ways of educating. you know. So that's something that I take to heart, and I think that as teachers, that's part of our job, is to help you, the students, move into the future, understanding what you do today and what's even been done in the past, but to understand that the future does not always look like what we're doing today. Just a few examples from books, you know, in the past, where the author or the designer tried to actually animate the type. This is from Alice in Wonderland, 1865. And the writer himself, Lewis Carroll, wrote this part this way. He actually wrote it out or typed it out this way. And this is the story. This is The Mouse's Tale. You can spell it T-A-L-E, The Mouse's Story, or The Mouse's Tail, T-A-I-L, the tail, right? And he made it look like a tail, right? Which is wonderful. It's a wonderful attempt at visualizing the content of that piece of type. So this is the story about the mouse, and he plays with the word tail, you know. And this is 1865. He was already sort of ahead of his time in saying, can't we just animate the type somehow on that page, even though it's going to be printed on the page? Moving forward, this is a classic piece of typography from Apollinaire from 1916. Very early part of the 20th century, when a lot of incredible movements were going on, constructivism, Dada, surrealism, and so on. And this is a poem about rain, and so he drew it out, actually, someone else said it, he drew it out with pencil to make it look like rain. So he was doing the same thing that Lewis Carroll was doing. In other words, the shape of the type resembles the content, what the content is. And this, I believe, for me, is an early example of concrete poetry, which became very popular in the 50s, 60s, and so on in the United States, and I think worldwide, where they wrote poetry, but not the writing, but it was the visualization of the poetry that looked like whatever it is they were describing. It can get a little bit corny after a while, but you know, that's a line that we all have to work with. Same period, Lucio Venna from Italy. This is called Circo Equestre, which you probably know what that means. But this is an attempt at describing a circus, a one-ring circus, with just sounds. The sounds of the crowd, the sounds of the what's the guy in the middle, the MC of sorts, yeah, you know, so you say, Signora, etc., etc. You know, he says, silencio, silencio, be quiet because we're going to watch the show, and the people around are going, bravo, bravo. It's a wonderful attempt at using sound and typography and composition to give you the feeling of a circus. Right? Again, these are all experiments, and this is where the future comes. It's just, you just try it out, you just experiment. Don't judge the idea before you even try it. And this came out the year that I started college, and my design teacher showed it to me. This is, The Bald Soprano is a play by Ionesco. It's an absurd play. In other words, it makes absolutely no sense. And Massin is a French typographer, incredible guy. And he took the content of the play, all the words and images of the actors in high contrast, and made this book so that you actually saw the play and read the play and listened to the play by reading the text. And what impressed me so much was that I could hear them screaming at each other. I could hear them screaming on top of each other. The words are on top of each other just by this composition. And as a young graphic designer, I thought, my God, this is so damn exciting. I mean, I get to do this stuff as a designer. You know, it was so cool. But I love this book. I have the book. And if any of you are book collectors, if you find an original edition of Massin's The Bald Soprano, buy it. It's incredible. So for me, one of the main issues is this transition from book culture to digital culture. It's been going on now for a couple of decades, and will only continue. And looking at it very, very simply, briefly, in book culture, the format or the tool you use is paper, whereas the format in digital culture is a screen. One can say, well, they're the same. You know, you can measure them, X, Y, and all that stuff. But the elements on paper are static. They don't move because once ink is married to paper, there's no change. And on the one hand, that's fantastic. You can look at a book that's 300 or 400 years old and still see it the way it was printed. Digital culture is dynamic. It's constantly changing. And that's something that we, of my generation, have to deal with. Because when we design for static presentation, we design it absolutely perfectly. So it looks the same no matter how many copies you make. Here, browsers can change, people's computers or cell phones or tablets may change, so there is no permanent or fixed view, if you will, and that's something that we have to consider. And finally, the elements you work with. This is what I work with: words and images. Very exciting. You, in your careers, in your work, will have word, image, movement, and sound. That's key. And to learn how to deal with all of those elements is part of your education. So for me, time becomes a design element. It's not just simply something you deal with. It really is one of your design elements. So for me, it's not just type, it's not just color, it's not just images, but it's time. It's one of the elements that you actually design with. And time, from the examples I already showed you and will continue to show you, time provides the possibility of words in sequence. So the first example, words were in sequence. Right? The other is that words actually move on the screen. That's what the second one did. Words were twirling around, the dot was moving around on the screen. That's what time allows you to do. And sequence has meaning, absolutely. And movement has meaning. And we have to take that very, very seriously. In terms of interfaces for computer screens or smartphones, that momentary transition that could be part of a second, a fraction of a second, the transition from one state to another state, there will be some change that happens. That could be designed also, or that should be designed also, because I think that has meaning. And time for me produces kinetic typography. I like this term because I like the word kinetic, because the origin of the word kinetic means movement. The Greek word means movement. People have said, why not use the word dynamic typography? Well, dynamic would be fine, but it also, when you look at the definition, really refers more to a force. And so I prefer the word kinetic, because it really does mean moving typography. It also has nicer letters, the K, the N. As a typographer, I prefer it. And kinetic typography to me is all about communication. And communication, for me, are all of these things. The two that I want to call your attention to is something that one doesn't often talk about when you're dealing with just basic typography. The first one is performing. What do you mean performing? What do you mean that the type performs? Well, even from what you've seen, if you think about that minute and a half or 2 minutes, that's a performance, right? And you'll see more of that in the other examples. And the other is touching emotions. The fact that some of you were moved by the last piece, or maybe even by the first piece, to realize, wow, just as we're here watching this, someone is dying or someone is born. That's something that we also need to understand, that we are communicating to people, and people have emotions. So I'm going to show you examples. As I said, these are all student work, and I've broken them up into different sections. And this is the first one. It's about visual communication and personal messages. So it's not using someone else's message or words. But they came up with the content. Now, obviously, the images in the second one, you'll obviously recognize where that's from, but it was their message, and I'll tell you what each of the briefs or the projects were. So the first one is a project I did in my graduate studio. It's the first semester for the incoming grad students. And I raised the question, what is a book? And I've done this in past classes with undergrads as well. What is a book? You know, and you start to dissect what we understand to be a book. Not just the finished product, but you can look at parts of it. What is a cover? What is binding? You know, what are pages? And there was big discussions and all that, and I asked each one to make a statement about what they were thinking, and this was her statement about what is a book. The second one and third one, another time I said, what is the future of reading? We were looking at some articles that basically said a lot of high school kids, they're doing this a lot, and they're reading these really short messages, but ask them to read like a chapter from a book, they're going, you know. They're not reading as much, you know, or they're not reading as deeply. That's the other thing. There are too many distractions, you know. So these were two responses to reading. And the last one is a self-portrait. And I love it because there's a bit of humor in it. And I hope that that you'll be able to understand the voiceover. So that's what these are. These are class projects, but in response to saying, what do you think? Not, here's some information, I want you to visualize it. Two very, very different things. So we'll just watch them all at once.
say you should look to your past to understand your present, but I've always found this problematic as I tend to have to think very hard to come up with significant events from my past. It's not a phenomenon, to be sure. Maybe I don't feel like I've done anything too important, or maybe I have some sort of medical condition, or maybe I'm secretly an emotionless robot. I don't know. But whatever the cause, I usually don't reminisce, don't recount, don't recall. And this is all a little sad, really, because when you're asking for a self-portrait, what you're really asking for is a story. And what kind of story can I tell without a past? So what if instead of using the past to tell you who I am in the present, I use facts about me in the present to tell you about myself in the past? And just maybe, I'll be able to reclaim some parts of myself in the telling. Fact 1. In my cutlery tray you'll find 4 forks, 4 spoons, 4 butter knives, 6 steak knives, 10 pairs of chopsticks, and 12 Chinese spoons. You know, Chinese spoons, those spoons you see in Chinese restaurants that are short, shallow, and ceramic. Yeah, I own 12 of them. Now, I wouldn't have expected this bias towards Asian eating utensils in my kitchen. I mean, sure, I am Chinese. My dad grew up in Hong Kong and my mom in Vietnam. But I was born in Canada and would honestly consider myself one of the most non-Asian Asians ever. And yet, here I am with a disproportionate number of chopsticks and Chinese spoons in my cutlery tray. I guess it's possible we're more a product of where they come from than we realize. Fact 2. I know how to play 3 instruments: guitar, harmonica, and piano. In an average day, I might spend half an hour playing the guitar, 15 minutes playing the harmonica, and no time playing the piano, mostly because I don't own one. But I do wish I had more opportunity to play the piano, which is sort of funny because I absolutely hated playing the piano in my youth. I mean, really hated it. Practicing, lessons, the whole thing. But now I find myself thankful that I went through those lessons that I hated so much. So these days, when I find myself going through something I hate, I don't stress over it too much because things you hate end up becoming part of you too, in spite of it all. Fact 3. My bookshelf here in Pittsburgh holds 1 book of fiction, 3 comic books, and 8 books on design. But where are the books on engineering? After all, I've spent the last 6 years of my life studying and working as a computer engineer. Maybe at some point I just stopped thinking like an engineer and started thinking like a designer. Well, to tell the truth, I never owned too many engineering books, so maybe it's not that simple. I don't think we should view ourselves in terms of singular aspects. We take on many roles. I believe we are the sum of our experiences. And maybe that's why I don't often look back to the past, because it feels like it's always right there beside you anyways.
What I find very interesting is when you ask the students to come up with their own messages and do their own writing, or maybe even find their own images, they do incredible work, absolutely incredible work. And so whereas maybe when I was starting to teach, I would give them material to work with, more and more I'm simply saying, you come up with the material. Not 100%, but more and more is happening. And I've been so impressed by what students come up with when they are left to their own devices. The next group is called visual voice, and someone talked about I can almost hear the person speaking just by looking at the words, and that's specifically what these two are examples of. Once in a while, the person gets the timing so right that you can really almost hear the words being spoken. So with that, I'm going to show you these 2 pieces. And I'm not too concerned about the English because enough of you are laughing at jokes, so you're getting it. So in the third, I mean, in the second piece, how many voices were there? Two.
And the narrator.
Was that three? Yes. Who were the three? The narrator. The boy. Yeah, we tend to forget about the narrator. And what did the student Jack do to distinguish between the three voices? Anyone?
Height.
Size, you said? Time? What do you mean by time?
Like time, like the one that it was from the old one,
Yeah.
like slower.
Slower, yeah.
And the one that it was from the boy is like bigger and different, faster.
Right. Actually, it was the opposite.
Yeah.
But time is one thing you were going to say.
No, different types.
Different typefaces?
Yeah.
Typefaces and
And
position and positioning. Yeah. So sometimes I invite someone from the drama department to do critiques in this class. It's a class called Time, Motion, and Communication, in case you haven't figured it out. And this guy Don Marinelli is very effusive, and he was saying to the student Jack, he said, "Jack, you're using the screen really well. You've got the little boy down in stage right, and the old man up in stage left." And he stopped and he said, "Wait, I'm talking to you like I'm talking to my directors." And then he said, "But wait, you are directors. That's your stage, and those are your actors." And I thought, God, Don, that's really brilliant. And I've used that ever since, That is your stage. And I don't care whether it's that screen, or this screen, or this screen. You are designing on a stage. And you decide where your actors will go. Are they going to be in lower stage right and upper stage left? You also decide each element's entrance, performance, and exit. Much the same way a choreographer or a director does. You decide each of those things. And you have to do it carefully, and you have to do it in concert with everything else. So a choreographer is not just going to focus on one dancer. If there are other dancers on the screen, he or she has to consider everyone on the stage. So that comparison, to stage performance, I think is really important in stuff like this, because we can understand why the light goes on the main speaker or the main singer. You know, you want the attention there. You don't want people looking at everything else, so you dim all the lights and you put the light directly on the person you want us to be looking at. You know, and when you want to move our attention, you dim that and you bring this up. The other thing that Don said, which was interesting, was he saw a version a little bit before the final one here, and he said, Jack, you know, you keep the little boy down here and you keep the old man up there. But he says, if you look at what the words say, they actually come together. The old man holds the little boy's hand. So bring the little boy's voice up here and bring the old man's voice up there. So actually they do come closer to each other. Those are small details, but they mean so much. They make such a difference in the way things are actually communicated. It also, when you vary, and I think those of you who do this kind of work know this, but when you begin varying things, it holds interest. If it's the very same thing over and over and over again, it becomes a little bit boring. Okay. Just one comment on the UPS one. The guy who did it knew when there was going to be laughter, and he would pause. He would let you laugh, and then he started things up. And you laughed perfectly on him. Very, very good. You're great performers. So the next one is mood, visual mood, and I'll just show you the first two because time is beginning to run away from us. The first one is a visualization of a haiku. It's a very short piece, and I might even show it twice because it goes very, very quickly. But look at what the movement does to the meaning of the words. And the second one is an interpretation of a quote by John Cage. John Cage is an American avant-garde composer. He passed away about a decade or so ago. The words are by John Cage, but the music is also by John Cage, which I think is really, really striking because by using the music's beats, you then build or decide when the words appear to those beats. And when you sync with it, it can be very, very powerful. I'm going to forget about the last one. So this is mood. This is not voice anymore. It's not like you can hear someone speak. Oh, by the way, about the voice, for me, the part where I really hear the voice in the old man and the little boy is when the little boy shyly admits that he wet his pants. You know, he's sort of like, you know, he can barely get it out, and then he just says, I wet my pants. And then the old man is laughing, going, I do that too, you know. Those two voices are very clearly distinguished by their behavior, you know, and that's where the time, I think what you're alluding to, comes in. So one is slower, one is shyer, the other one is more boisterous. Okay. So we'll watch these two for mood. Were you able to read it?
Yeah.
Should I do one more time? those last two notes, my God, they're perfect. They're just perfect. You know, when a piece like that appears and he says, so what do you think? Should I change anything? I think, not really. It looks pretty good to me. But again, in this case, taking someone else's words, but I think really understanding what John Cage was about. He was very much of an avant-garde. He was always poking and challenging the norm. You know, so basically he's saying, why can't this be, you know, poetry and so on. It's really quite wonderful. And the other one, the falling letters, and falling in such a way so that you're able to read them momentarily, and if you're not paying attention, you're going to miss some of them. You know, it's lovely, really, really gorgeous. So, for me, rhythm is at the heart of all of this work. If you don't understand rhythm, if you don't understand movements with rhythm, if you don't understand pacing, it becomes stale, it doesn't have humanity, and so on. And so this is the first project we do in my time motion class. And I've done them in different ways since I've been doing this for so long. But of late, students take a piece of music, and I try to challenge them to pick, you know, sort of difficult pieces of music sometimes. And they have to visualize the movement and the rhythm, you know. I ask them to keep it abstract, because when you start dealing with representational images, it gets really challenging and messy sometimes, you know. So when you just have basic elements, you're fine. I'm also going to do this quickly because of the time, so I will miss this. I'll take the second one out. The first one is a 30-second piece, just based on a piece of music, and this actually was 1 year when I was not teaching my class because I was running the department. And so you saw the name Hee-Bok Lee. He was the one who did the falling leaves. He's a Korean student, probably the most gifted motion graphics person I've ever taught. He is spectacular. I'll show you some more of his work later on. He taught for me the course, and so this was a project that he gave. He took 30-second pieces of music, and he let the students choose one of them, and they had to animate. And the elements were these squares of color to keep it really, really simple. The third one is, I really like it because it is such a, almost like a meditation on this piano piece. And the last piece is the exact opposite. I mean, it's a very percussive piece, and this guy just, you know, like he dove into the software and he danced with it and moved with it. So these are the pieces. I love this project because there have been so many interpretations of music in the past years. I could do an entire lecture just on rhythm examples, but I'm giving you an overview. So the last group is information. Sometimes you have to convey information. So I'll show you two examples. Actually, there's so 2 or 3, and then one is a very personal thing. This is by Hibakli, where he takes part of a poem and interprets the poetry. So information and then personal expression. This one was supposed to describe a famous designer and who he is, what his impact is, and the student decided to use his words and his work. final piece is the poem, part of the poem. Two quotes I'm going to share with you as we end. This is one by Hugo Ball that I believe all of us in design and the arts have to understand. The word and the image are one. You cannot separate them. Word is image, image is word, and certainly as typographers, those of us who do typography and design make them one. And in the same way, I think when we move them around on a screen, they are one. And the other quote is by the artist Paul Klee. And this to me is a reminder that we are communicating to people, to human beings, because we see with one eye and feel with the other. In fact, most of the time when we first see something or respond to something, we respond to it from here. We're not responding to it intellectually. It starts here and then it moves up here. And so we need to understand that when we communicate, there are times when we need to appeal to the gut or to the heart before we appeal to the intellect. And with that, muchas gracias.
¿Quieren hacer preguntas? No sé qué dice el micrófono. ¿Te lo pasé? No, ¿alguna pregunta? No están listos para salir.
You can also just come up and talk to me privately. I've kept you a long time. Thank you for staying. And I know that some of you have to leave, but if you do want to come up and ask me questions, I'm more than happy to answer. So.
¿Alguien con una pregunta por acá? Y si no...
Trata de no ser tratado así, no tratar de no mencionar los ojos. Eso sí, cuando se le llama el ojo, sea en la pantalla directamente, bueno, eso porque no lo